Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Robert Vaš and I'm the CEO of Central European Strategy Council and the Center for European Affairs founding member. It is my great pleasure to open the TATRA Summit Conference already for the third time. We've been establishing this conference together with Ambassador Ivan Korčok, who is our permanent representative to the EU, and Ambassador Rastislav Káčer 3 years ago, on the basis of success of the GLOBSEC conference, which has become one of the leading foreign policy and security conference in the region. Our aim was to shape the debate on the future of Europe here in Slovakia and Central Europe, and to contribute from Central Europe to the pan-European debate on the future of EU. After the 2 successful years here in Bratislava and later in Brussels, we have decided to move back the conference to Bratislava. And we are meeting here in a very crucial time today, when the Central Europe is celebrating the 25 years since fall of communism, 10 years in joining EU, but it is also a very important time when Europe is facing important challenges internally and externally. As the new head of the new EU Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, told a few weeks ago that and underlined how important will be the upcoming political cycle, he said that we either regain the trust of the European people or we lose Europe forever as we know it. So it is just underlining the importance on how Europe will be going on in the upcoming years. When I look at the list of participants, I see more than 500 people coming from around 25 countries of Europe. And when I see a lot of influential politician guests, former prime ministers, ambassadors, but also businessmen, thinkers, and journalists, it gives me a little trust that this conference may contribute to the very important debate on the key European issues, as one of them is very important, is the growth agenda. Let me thank for the partners without whom this conference would not be possible to organize. First of all, it is the Ministry of Finance, without whom support it would be impossible to organize also the investment forum, and personally to Minister Kažimír, who gave his personal auspices over this conference, International Visegrad Fund, Bruegel, Slovak Investment Holding, but also our exclusive private partner, TATRA Banka, and its chairman, Igor Vida, who is with us today, Saab, Ernst & Young, and EPH, Energetický and Průmyslový Holding, and many others. Let me also thank to 2 special persons. First of all, Deputy Minister Vasil Hudák and Deputy Minister Peter Javorčuk, who has helped us in setting this conference up. So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce the Deputy Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, Mr. Peter Kažimír, and the Minister of Finance, who will address us with the opening remarks. So, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, thanks a lot. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you here in Bratislava. This is the 3rd time policymakers are gathering at the TATRA Summit. However, it's only the 1st time we are organizing an investment forum, and we have decided to do so for several reasons. To start with, we anticipated that sooner or later investments had to appear high on political agenda. The recent discussions proved that this was the correct assumption. I think it's no rocket science. Low growth, deflation risk, high unemployment, and decreasing investment levels indicate that something is still wrong in Europe. The diagnosis and policy prescription seems to be quite clear now. More public and private investments should help us overcome the crisis. I'm glad that the European consensus has moved in this direction. The new European Commission announced his €300 billion investment plan. We welcome really welcome this initiative and do believe that it's important first step to European economic recovery. I'm very glad that the TATRA Summit Investment Forum brings the most distinguished businesses, business people and policymakers under one roof. In the context of recently established task force, we are happy to provide actually the first major international platform to discuss a European project pipeline. The first-hand feedback from the private sector will be key, really will be key for this initiative to be successful. It's extremely important to put together a list of sound European investment projects. However, the issue of how to finance these projects is not secondary. To the contrary, it will be the crucial question in a not so distant future. Only a few member states has the public sector some space to invest, and even their national politics makes it difficult. In most of the member states, including Slovakia, state budgets are too strained. It's virtually impossible to make public investments of macroeconomic significance. Furthermore, it's a well-documented fact that the private sector is deleveraging. The European Commission noted just recently that the effects of deleveraging on GDP, on investment, on consumption and trade balance are very long and very significant. More and more people realize that in a situation like this, we must act. The public sector has to act. I do not imply that throwing money at economies will sort out all the problems. Nevertheless, public investments are needed to point to the strategic directions and to mobilize private investments too. I would like to stress that promoting investments is not equal to negating the merits of public consolidation. It's not equal to questioning the significance of structural reforms. Promoting investments is a matter of basic arithmetic, pure and simple. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. GDP is composed of consumption, investment, government spending, and the net export. If investment is falling and other components remain unchanged, GDP is falling too. Unfortunately, this is a pretty much the definition of today's situation. Investment levels are abnormally low in the European Union. What is more, the gap between the optional and the actual level of investment has been greater in the core countries than in the southern periphery. The autumn forecast published just recently by the European Commission is quite straightforward in this matter. Let me quote. The persistent weakness of investment has two noteworthy implications for the EU economy. First, differences in investment rates across member states are one of the main drivers of the historically high differences in cyclical conditions. A higher level of cyclical differences complicates macroeconomic management in a monetary union. And second, sustained periods of weak investment also have important medium-term implications as slower capital accumulation depress potential growth. This is quite a shocking assessment. The Eurozone is basically trapped in a vicious circle. Fall in demand causes lower investment, which in turn further depresses potential growth. The good news is that the money is out there. We just need to pick up off the ground and let it flow. In other words, we have to mobilize the mountains of idle savings that are too scared to be invested into the real economy. However, and here comes a bit tricky part, we must resume productive investments without having to compromise the fiscal rules. I do believe that it's possible. Given the limits of national budgets, a common European investment program financed by common European borrowing should be seriously considered. One of its tasks would be to absorb excess liquidity from the markets. And an interesting proposal to create a 700 billion euro fund for investments was recently made by my Polish colleague, Finance Minister Mateusz Surek. Similarly, the IMF has also recently proposed common investment in public infrastructure from the EU core, from EU center. Economic theory, as well as practical experience, shows that if the Eurozone is to prosper, it will be key to complete its fiscal architecture. I do believe that a common European investment program is an inevitable brick, inevitable stone in this construction. Its timing and particular setup need to be discussed for sure, and we are ready to steer these discussions. It's one of our priorities for the Slovak presidency of the European Council in 2016. By the time grand projects hopefully materialize, we need to act within the given limits. The constrained public sources need to be used in the most efficient, most useful manner possible. I'm glad that the TATRA Summit Investment Forum is going to be a useful platform to address these short-term and pressing challenges. One particular experience that we would like to share is the use of financial instrument under the Slovak investment holding. The Slovak government decided that at least 3% of the European structural investment funds will be set aside for revolving instruments. The aim is to mobilize private capital and to support economically viable projects in strategic areas such as infrastructure, energy efficiency, energy production, SMEs, social venture capital, or waste management. Slovakia was not the best performer in this area in the past. However, our recent efforts place us at the forefront in the European Union. We are excited that the most distinguished policymakers, business people, thinkers, and journalists are joining us here today to inspire and to be inspired. Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me repeat how honored I am to welcome you here at the TATRA Summit Investment Forum. Despite the negative economic prospect, I do believe that fascinating times lie ahead of us. And it's our pleasure that you have accepted the invitation to come to Bratislava. Looking at the list of participants, I have no doubt, really no doubt, that the following days are going to be ripe with the most productive discussions and innovative ideas. Enjoy them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And now I ask the panelists of the first panel and the chairwoman, Rebecca Christie, to take the floor.
Chairwoman.
Sit here. Actually, I'll sit here where I can have a table.
Your place.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Minister, for your remarks. We will now hear from each of our very distinguished panelists, and then hopefully we can have more of a broad conversation with questions from you in the audience. So think about what you'd like to ask. I think our guest from the EIB is the first to speak. If you'd like to begin, just speak for a few minutes.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to here. Let me begin a very, very personal remark. The Vice Prime Minister mentioned some very interesting things. And I remember when I was a young child, So 55 years ago, there was a Hungarian game, because my nationality is Hungarian, in Hungary at that time. So it's called, I came from America, so, and my profession is 2 letters only. So, and today, I repeat this, but I came from Luxembourg. And so, and my profession is 3 letters. One is lending, the other is L, the other is blending, and the third one is advising. That's why I mentioned, because the EIB, which is the biggest multilateral borrower and lender all around the world, I think it's a key role player and important player in the field of investment. And so for the technical situation, at the moment I have no the opportunity to show for the figures in the last year, but I have to mention, so in the last 2 years and this year, the European Investment Bank was very active in the field of investment, and after the capital increasing of the member states, it was 10 billion euros, so we increased our activity last year more than 75 billion euros in lending, and that's why I think it's a very big support of the European Union. It's not only the European Union, because we have partnership programs of outside the Union, which is important for the public investors in these areas and the private investors in these areas too. And we are very active in several fields of the economy. At the moment, I don't want to give you a very detailed information about it, but maybe it's during the discussion I have the opportunity to focus several things. Because Mr. Kazimierz mentioned, so the infrastructure project, so we are one of the greatest financing of the European infrastructure project, not only the public infrastructure project, but the private infrastructure project. So, and so you mentioned too the energy projects. It's a very important thing, energy safety and security all around Europe. So not only the geographical problems, but so the energy efficiency and the renewable energy, then the climate aspect and some others. So in several fields of the infrastructure, we are very active. And so last but not least, I think it's the important part of our activity that we are thinking about not only the tomorrow, but in for the next generation opportunities, and that's why we finance research and development. We have several new facilities for research and development, and we are very active in the educational sector, the universities, and some other part. So let me stop that at the moment, because you know, so because our bank is a very big one, so it's an important thing. It's not only in the borrowing side, but the lending side is a high portion of activity, is a good, and so we make a lot of leverage, not a deleverage, and as Mr. Kazimierz mentioned, and the time when so the banking sector, mainly in the Central and Eastern European countries, is under the leverage period, is quite important. For instance, for the small and medium-sized enterprises, but not only them, but the others too. Let me stop here.
Thanks so much. Mr. Stepic, the former CEO of Raiffeisen, would like to speak next.
A very good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just pinpoint a few major topics, which most probably we are going to discuss, because I was told not to be too long at the beginning. I'm usually too long, I have to start with. Why are the Americans doing much better than we are doing in Europe? Key question. Growth forecasts up to 2018, double figures to European average. What are the reasons for the discrepancy? I have been focusing three major issues, which I would love to discuss specifically what the measures are concerned. Fiscal austerity, deteriorating demographics and suboptimal economic rebalancing within the EU, number one. Number two, financial and economic fracturing. Major point as a banker, over-regulation. Major point as a banker, over-regulation. Major point as a banker, over-regulation that is killing the market. I could repeat it again. And finally, immigration of skilled labor from the periphery. This is where I'm not going into because there are other people who are much better to talk about it, but I can only mention to you that in RBI Vienna, Raiffeisen Bank International, we have 48 nationalities working. Most of them are coming, high skilled, are coming from where? Romania and Bulgaria. Do they have too many there? No. They would need the skills themselves. Still, they are running away. And Romania, just to give you a figure, has now reached the same population as they used to have in 1975. And this is my point with regards to immigration. Fiscal authority, I had a long discussion in the car driving to Belgrade with one of the national economists of our country, a very famous one. He's more in the leftist corner and say, oh, what you say is stupid, austerity is nonsense, we have definitely to strive for investment, so the name of the game is deficit spending. So, and it took me an hour and I had to stop the discussion, and I think we will discuss that as well. I think fiscal stimulus in form of deficit spending makes only sense in some of the countries, those countries where €1 of government investment is creating at least another euro of private investment. If that is not the case, then we are just prolonging the deficiencies that are existing in the national economies of the various countries. So what is needed is both structural reforms. Some of the countries are ready. Some of them have to go the hard way. What counts and is true in business very often, to a great extent, is also true for national economies. A lot of time, ladies and gentlemen, has been wasted without any reforms in the EU. A lot of time has been wasted without reforms in the EU. I have to mention countries. 70% of the gross national product is with Germany, Italy, and France. The thick man on the continent is France and Italy. If I look to the development that we had, in spite of the fact we have had Greece as a bad example, very few reforms actually happened in France. Government spending continued, indebtedness increased, unemployment also. So the cry to deficit spending only makes sense if you really are prepared to do something against structural deficiencies. Deteriorating demographics, less babies, longer life, same pension schemes. No pension reforms. There is very few countries. Sweden has done very successfully so within 1.5 years exemplary pension reforms. My question, why do other countries, including Austria, not copy the same system? Economic rebalancing, an ongoing debate between Moscovici and others and Mrs. Merkel. Mrs. Merkel, you should give up austerity. Why don't you let your countrymen and women more in their pockets, less taxes, more spending, and don't export as much as you did in the past, possibly, so that we can catch up, we from other nations. I mean, this is an illusion, frankly speaking. This is not how it works. Definitely, I would say the Germans have a rather similar saving culture as the Slovaks. Slovaks are the highest savers in Europe, at least it was the case in the past. So are the Germans, and the ones are drinking wonderful wine in the evening and enjoying lives, and the Germans are eating sauerkraut and Weißwurst and are preparing themselves for the next day. I leave the topic for Basel III and economic fracturing for the discussion, because I think it will be a hot topic anyhow, and I think I should leave hot topics, and I'd rather pass on to the authority.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I know Basel III is keeping you all up at night. Very exciting. We'll have balloons and circus coming up next. As you may know, we were expecting to have the Romanian finance minister with us originally. She was unable to make it. So now we have, from the European Commission, a man at the forefront of efforts to find ways to restart investment and combine public and private money. So Martin, perhaps you could tell us how that's going.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Indeed, I was not planning on being in this panel. Quite frankly, also because there are clear limits to what I can say at this point in time. But I was here actually for a meeting with of the task force on investment. This is a task force that has recently been established by the ECOFIN, and we had very interesting discussions this morning with private sector participants to get their view on the investment problem. Now, what is clear, even though I cannot say too much, but what is very clear is that the big priority for this Commission is indeed to revive investment in Europe, and I would say rightly so. Compared to the peak in 2007, investment is down by some 15%. And this is both in terms of public and private investment. So both levels have come down quite a bit. What we're seeing still today is significant slack in the European economies. Unemployment is still unacceptably high, and this clearly poses a problem now today. But it also causes a problem going forward, because if people stay too long outside of the labor market, they are going to lose their skills, and quite apart from this being a social and a personal tragedy for those people involved, it's also going to impact negatively on potential growth going forward. So action is very urgent. So that is what we're working on now. A lot has been said already, also by the Deputy Prime Minister, on the causes of this decline in investment. So I can be relatively short on that. First, we need to acknowledge that some of the investment we saw before the crisis was simply investment in not very productive sectors. We have had the real estate boom in number of countries. That investment is gone, and it's gone for good, and I would say rightly so. But then in addition to that, what we're all struggling with is still the high levels of public and private debt. So there is a need for economic actors, be it states, businesses or households, to deleverage. And that clearly pushes down growth, and that in itself has also a negative impact on investment demand. And here again, the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned a vicious circle. Well, I wouldn't say that we're already in it, but clearly this is this is a risk that we're facing. Other factors also very much related to this is the general macroeconomic uncertainty that we have seen. This was very prevalent, clearly, at the height of the financial crisis in 2012. I think certainly in a number of countries in the Eurozone, no investor in his right mind would invest under those circumstances. But even today, there still seems to be an issue, be it a bit less than fortunately, than a couple of years ago. Now, then another point that was mentioned already, the financial fragmentation, again, very prevalent at the height of the crisis. Things have improved across the board. You can clearly see that in terms of the sovereign spreads that have converged. But still today, there are significant differences, first between countries, maybe less so on the sovereign, but on the financing conditions for businesses and households, but certainly across sectors and across maturities. Now, and it has been suggested also here that maybe financial regulation plays a role in this. Clearly, I would not go as far as my co-panelist to the left, because let's not forget that the regulation has been tightened for a reason. But clearly, it may come also with some consequences that we certainly need to look into and to see whether we can rebalance somewhat. And then lastly, there's the issue of structural rigidities and adverse demographics, brain skill mismatches, etc. These were problems that were largely with us already before the crisis, but clearly they're hitting back at us now with a vengeance. And all these things together explain why investment is so low. So what it says is that we very much need a comprehensive approach. So it's no use to just throw money at the economy without also addressing these other more structural problems. So what we need is, on the one hand, actions to catalyze investment finance. Now here, a very important point has been made also this morning. There is a lot of liquidity at the moment, but we do not have always the right type of finance. So some things, some types of finance are shorter in supply than other types of finance. So we need to find a way to catalyze to the maximum the private finance that is available. We need actions to identify and structure investable projects. Again, following the very same logic. If there's plenty of funding and liquidity around, but they need to have investable. You need to have investable projects for this money to reach the real economy. So clearly, this is something we need to work on. And then, last but not least, we need to combine this with actions to improve the overall business environment, the investment environment in Europe, and that requires action both on the EU level, the national level, and as well the subnational level. So, and I would say that the key challenge for us, for policymakers going forward, is to make sure that all the policies start pulling in the same direction. I think that is the key task that is before us, and well, that's what we're all working on very diligently. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those remarks. Minister Casimir, we've heard now from the EIB and the European Commission, two of the European institutions that are working to try and get policy all in the same direction. Do you think there needs to be a new EU-level fund, some sort of investment organization to perhaps to pool private sector money and match it with public money and try and invest it?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to support Mr. Stepic because I fully agree with his sauerkraut club. We are the member of this club, also in Europe. So, and I agree with the needs of structural reforms. And austerity at the same time. So the fiscal discipline and structural reforms at the same time. Talking about the new institutions you are mentioning now, the investment program doesn't have to take the form of an explicit Eurozone budget, for example, which I don't want to repeat you or something like this, but its economic essence can be embodied in existing institutions. I'm pretty sure about this. In this sense, there is one proposal which I find extremely interesting. As you certainly know, there are heated discussions on the whether ECB should go for full-blown quantitative easing. And now, I'm not a central banker, so it's not my role to speak out in favor of QE or against it. It's really not my role. But however, should the ECB opt for QE, I would suggest it could buy the bonds of European Investment Bank. And this is a question which could return a little bit. Within this framework, the EIB could finance a massive investment program by selling more bonds. They would be, I'm sorry, they would be purchased on the secondary markets by the ECB. And it would kill two birds by one stone, because first it would define a suitable asset for QE, and second, it would keep the EIB bonds yields low, since the secondary market purchases by the ECB would provide implicit guarantees to investors. So this is an idea. This proposal has been promoted by several prominent European economists. I find it elegant too, because no treaty change are needed, no new institutions, just ready to go.
What do you think? Could the ECB buy EIB bonds in bulk?
Yeah, yes, it's an interesting thing because, you know, so it's a bit similar that in the national politics, so the cooperation between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. This is a European level question, as at the moment this question, so on the debate, so I think in our side, for the EIB side, it's an absolutely important question because of the EIB, as Mr. Kazimir mentioned, so issued a low interest rate bond, but so it's the interest of the final beneficiaries, because we are giving this low interest rates in our projects into long maturity financing, and that's why it's quite important for the banking sector. But at the moment, the banking sector is so-called full of liquidity from the European Central Bank side and the other side. But I think there is an important distinction, but several member states is not members of the Eurozone at the moment, and that's why we have to take some distinction between the Eurozone situation and the out of the Eurozone because of, for instance, maybe Mr. Babiš is here, for instance, in the Czech Republic, so the monetary policy is very active and successful, and in Poland its own monetary policy is very active and successful, and so I have to mention the Hungarian National Bank monetary policies and the new facilities introduced to the economy. So that's why several interesting points. Maybe I return some questions, because I think at the moment, so the European Union, so including majority of the member states, back to the realities. We realized So all the member states and all the government, the situation, the challenges. But after this, we have to find a real way of the solution. And you know, so Euclid, so before Christus, 300 years, they made a remark that so there is no royal road to the geometry, and I think so there's no royal road to the solution of this type of challenges. That's why we have to find not the royal road, but the most appropriate road of the answer of these challenges and the answer of this question.
So, Martin, it sounds like it might be awkward for the ECB to buy EIB bonds because they're for the EU 28 and not just the Eurozone. Would the EU look into creating some sort of new investment fund, perhaps more focused in the Eurozone, or is there a need for something else that could issue bonds into the market?
Now, Rebecca, you wanted to have coffee with me, probably to get this type of information in private.
You said you could discuss everything in public, but it would
Yes,
be fine
no,
to ask
okay.
you.
No, but clearly this is something I will not comment on at this stage. Maybe just one comment on the issue of ECB buying bonds of the EIB. Certainly, this is not something for me to comment. It's a question whether ECB will want to do it and whether the EIB would be looking for it. That said, I'm not sure that this is the key problem actually, because the EIB has no problem whatsoever to fund itself. It's probably one of the best issuers in the world, can issue notes in large quantities. So I think if there is something what is lacking or maybe lacking in Europe, it's not so much the liquidity, it's plenty, but there may be a lack of risk-bearing capacity here and there. So I think in thinking about financing, that's something to be kept in mind.
So who should bear the risk?
I'm just observing that there may be an issue of lack of risk-bearing capacity. Who then will in the end take that risk? That's another question. But here, I think again in terms of the financing issue, the issue does not seem to be, from my perspective, a lack of liquidity. The ECB is providing plenty of liquidity, and also this morning it was confirmed that there are investors out there that are willing to invest, are looking for projects to invest, if the right circumstances can be created for them to come in.
Mr. Stefan, who do you think should we look to take this risk? Should we look for equity investors? Should we look for the EU to make better use of structural funds? Where can this risk-bearing capacity come from?
I think we are mounting the horse from the wrong side. I mean, we are discussing issues which are not the real issues. The real issues, as I see it, is, as correctly mentioned, there is enough, if not to say over liquidity in the market. So why should banks not lend if that is their basic business? Why should I not sell cheese if I'm a grocer in cheese? The answer is relatively easy, because the regulators have closed my front door because the cheese got smelly to some extent. And I was bound to replenish my whole stock. My whole stock is capital. For the last 7 years or so, 6 years, banks had been bombarded by the regulators to increase their capital and their different capital composition. It's not only capital, it's also the capital composition. I'm talking here not on behalf of Raiffeisen Bank International, I have to say it very clearly, but as a private person because I want to talk, to force banks to increase their capital within 4 years, not by 10, 15, 50, 100%, but 3.5 times. There is no industry in the world who can survive that. This is impossible. Why should I not lend if I have liquidity? I want to lend. I cannot lend because the capital restrictions doesn't allow to do that. Even worse, to the capital restrictions, we got all types of regulatory impediments on the liquidity side. What commercial bank can in the future lend structurally, mid to long term? I don't know. We all need him. We all need him.
Do we have any questions coming from the audience?
We all need him.
About our need for the EIB and or for cheese?
No, no.
Your taste may vary.
The question is not the cheese. The question is that with the new regulations, we have created a situation, and I have not come to the point yet, by far not. Just let me open another page. What would have happened with Central and Eastern Europe if the regulations that we have now would have been in existence in 1990? Can you tell me? Nothing would have changed. No transition, no conversion, nothing would have happened. We would be unable to we would have been unable to finance it. What happens now, just imagine, after 2008, the domestic regulators were suddenly asking us, please retreat, get back all your money for very nationalistic regions. And this within the EU. This within the EU. Here sits a person called Mr. Stepic, who has called at that time the largest Western bank to create the Vienna Initiative with the sole implication to convince them and other regulators in the various countries not to withdraw the funds from Central and Eastern European countries. Because this happens, I mean, totally opposite to the EU idea of a common market of together and whatever what we have.
Well, maybe we'll bring it back to the present a little bit. Minister, can you tell me
You don't like that discussion.
what you might be doing here?
I have to I would like to confirm that because I I see the transfer of dividends from my country.
Yes.
Yes, and these amounts are tremendous. So
Yes.
this is outflow, not inflow of dividends or capital. Talking about my country.
Yes, but you are asking bank tax from us.
Yeah.
You are taxing banks, which is a nonsense, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, because it doesn't help at all. It only helps your budget.
You mean this Austrian type of
Yes,
life?
yes, the Austrian type,
Yeah,
which you
because-
adopted then at
Because
a later
first of
stage.
all, you introduced
Yes,
this tax in
absolutely.
Austria.
Yes,
So
this
we
is the
just
Austrian
copied
habit.
the
Yes,
the headquarters of
but
monarchy.
your Prime Minister promised me he will not introduce a bank tax, and finally he did 3
We
weeks
did it,
after.
and next year will be divided by 2. I'm thinking, I'm
Fine.
sure.
Wonderful.
And look
I'm
at
very
your
happy.
profit.
This
Mr.
is already a
Stepic, in
one
this
game.
country.
Sorry, let me interrupt. Only
Absolutely.
one thing. So
Comment from the
I
EIB.
think something's happened before the banking regulation strengthening. So
Yes.
something happened, and I think it's impossible to forget this.
Yes.
So and
Absolutely.
that's why it was a partial response of
Yeah.
so
Yes.
for the crisis. At the moment, we always declare that so we after the crisis, so I have some feeling that so it's after the crisis situation is a bit fragile, so you know, so because several countries is so the feeling of the depression and several Ds, you know, so I collect several Ds: depression, deflation, double deficits, so deficits and the state budget and the current account, so a big state debt, devaluation of the national currency. So it's not a good news for the banking sector, for instance, in the collateral side. So and the leverage and additional, so in the political point. So several countries as a defense expenditure growing, which is, I think, is another important point, because I mentioned Central and Eastern European countries only here in Great Britain and Sweden, but I have to mention that the Baltic states and others, some geopolitical reasons, it's new challenges, and that's why its impact on the economic situation, which I mentioned. So we'll be back to the realities, and we realize all the challenges, but there are new challenges. For instance, this type of new challenge, and so so we realize the investment gap. Okay. But we have to very careful way analyze it. What kind of investment gap, and how can we narrowing this investment gap? What kind of tools we have to use there in near the future? For instance, we use the European Investment Bank. Okay, we are ready. Maybe we have to use so some other state tools. For instance, the national promotional banks. So in several countries, because of reducing the risk of the banking sector, for instance, the cooperation. So the investment fund, for instance, some guarantee schemes and guarantee opportunities. So, and the others. That's why I mentioned, so we need a very careful way of thinking, and we have to find the real answers of these type of old and new questions.
Just one quick comment on regulation, because I feel I do have to react on this. I think it's a gross oversimplification to say that the root cause of the problem is regulation, and well, just deregulate and everything will be fine. I think that is, I don't want to leave that impression. It's certainly not an impression that is an analysis that is shared by us. As I've said before, yes, on certain segments of the market, I mean, you may have to look at the need for recalibration, but clearly there was a reason why there was a re-regulation of the sector, and also let's not forget about that. So I think it's all about finding a right balance here, and let's not repeat the mistakes of the past and go completely overboard on this issue.
No, this is
if I may just follow up with Minister Kazimir, Slovakia certainly has been known for being somewhat rigid in its rules and in its approach to budgeting and things like that. Are you looking to change that? Are you looking to find some way, maybe not to do the complete deregulation that we've just been warned about, but also to modernize, perhaps?
Already mentioned that the Slovak Republic belongs to so-called German club. So I would like to stress that the focus on investment is not a policy U-turn. And this is just how some of your colleagues, superficial journalists, or my colleagues, superficial politicians, might like to portray it, that the austerity is over, that it was a mistake, let's spend instead. Simply, this is not true. So, no, not at all. Making order in public budgets was extremely important, because we had to convince our bond market investors that we can fulfill our financial commitments. It was extremely important for us. And it has been the right policy to follow the fiscal rules. And I do believe that we must stay the course. And on structural reforms, this is exactly the same story, because we have to call for structural reforms and investment at the same time. They have to go hand in hand. It's not either or game.
Thanks. Do we have any questions coming from you in the audience? We have one over here in the corner. If you could please introduce yourself before you ask your question, that would be great. Thank you.
Ivan Bayer, member of Slovak Society for Futurology. I have not question about cheese, but I have question about water. From the point of view of water investments, water efficiency, and long-term vision. And my question is, because water can be, from the point of investment view, very, very effective, maybe, but still isn't. Why it is so? Question is, why can't we use more water bonds and water equities from the point of synergistic, systemic point of view in the nexus of water, food and energy? Because water efficiency works only in cross borders between these three sectors. So it's not only regulation or austerity or more lax markets, but it's about vision. I tell you that 10 years from now, the world will need more water than the supply is. After 40 years, there will be needed 40% more water than now the supply is. So the water efficiency is in the first priority, and when it will not be transferred to the water investments, it will be disaster. So what can we make, what can we do to do maximum for the moment that water disaster did not come to us?
Is there anyone who would like to talk about water investments and their role in economic development? Perhaps.
I think I can do that, if you allow me to do so,
By all
Mrs.
means,
Chair.
by all means.
I think water is definitely the resource that finds the easiest financing when it comes to natural resources.
Mhm.
Why? What you said also commercially is fully accepted. If you go to the large companies, Nestle, whatever, they are all constantly investing themselves into water resources worldwide. That means the likelihood that you find private financing alongside with company investments, specifically what water is concerned, is very high. Therefore, frankly speaking, I'm not afraid that financing of water of all kinds, and I'm not only talking about drinking water now, what you have been stressing, but I'm also talking about wastewater, seawater refining and what have you. That is still working relatively easily, if I may say so.
Yes, so one additional point. So I had several examples with co-financing the water industry. So co-financing the funds of the European Union and the European Investment Bank. And I think if anybody has a good project for financing this in the private sector, so our bank is absolutely capable to finance this at the moment. But we need an expert and extant inquiry, of course.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments from the audience? While you were thinking, I will throw out another question to our panel about a possible capital increase for the European Investment Bank. Is that something that you would support as a finance minister?
That's worried me, because we already increased the capital last year, I think. We have agreed.
Yes.
On this, I think so far, this is the same issue with this ECB purchasing of the bonds. So it's, okay, we are ready we are ready for discussion, but we are not ready to increase at this moment because first of all, we'd like to see the results from the last increasing of capital. So, and it's needed or not? Just
at the moment, it's a question how can we fulfill the targets of the last capital increase, the 10 billion capital increase. And we are on the way, and the last year and this year. So the question is after this, because we have some room at the moment for our activities. So, and that's why I think it's at the moment it's not on the table.
Yeah.
Okay, because the EIB, whenever I've been in Luxembourg to visit your fine institution, makes clear that there's a limit to how much risk you can take on without additional capital. And it's never been clear to me exactly how much additional we're talking about. So I'd love to hear any thoughts you might have about numbers.
We have a very ambitious program, and that's why this in this year, or the signature capacity and or target, so we called it this scope. I don't know really why, because I am only 14 months the vice president of the European Investment Bank. Maybe I need some more time to understand it. So we all the last year, so our additional lending was 75 billion euro. This year is around 70 billion euro, and the next year is around the same. I think our capital is good enough, and so at the moment our capital adequacy ratio is a bit over than 26%, and I think it's more than enough. But there is room some activity, and so we bearing a more risky project, for instance, investing in the European Investment Fund, which is quite important. So that's why we call. Not only today, but in the previous times, not only the bank, but the EIB group together with the fund. It's quite important because the cooperation with the member states is central in Eastern European countries. In the previous time, it was questionable, but I think so we give a new momentum for this cooperation. For example, for in Slovakia, if I knew the situation well. So at the moment, so we are ready to fulfill in this capital basis or targets. But if the situation would be changing, so it's a new challenge. It could be new tools. It could be additional capital.
Would you like to talk about how the EIB is seen in Brussels?
How the EIB, well,
It comes up a lot in a lot of these sort of brainstorming things about investment. How can we expand the EIB capacity? How can we make more of it? How can we allow it to take on more risk than its current constraints might keep it to?
You have interesting discussions in Brussels, apparently. No, I mean, how is the EIB viewed in Brussels? I can be very clear about that. I mean, the EIB is for us a key partner in implementing our policies, and certainly going forward with an investment agenda. I would envisage a very close cooperation between the Commission and the EIB going forward. But for now, I leave it at this.
Any more questions coming out there? One in the back here. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there, sir, with the bright lights. But please, we'll start here, and then we'll go to the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Lubor Vancho, KPMG. I just wanted to ask one question, because I guess all of us can conclude that there is a lot of liquidity. Or the banks, they have liquidity. I don't absolutely agree with you about the bank, how heavily they are regulated they are. But also it's also true that it was a lot of irresponsible banks, and they came on their knees to ask for money from governments. And a lot of governments, a lot of European governments saved a lot of banks, which was incorrect, I would say. So now we are in the situation, it would be potentially maybe messed for a while, but now maybe we would be already out of that bad times. So now we face the situation that there is a huge debt for governments, they have a huge debt, and also, especially in Western countries, maybe except Italy, there is a huge debt for people. So people, they have a lot of debt. So if we said that growth is coming from spending of government, they cannot spend because they have huge debt, or they should not. People, they have huge debts already. They have to pay rent, energy, food, debt. Then it's export, which is also a significant part. So basically, there is not too many people who are going to buy anything. So are you ready also as a bankers and politicians that for next decade, if some banks will not be bankrupt and will save some money, some funds maybe, that the growth will be very slow, very low, maybe 1% for next decade, and it will be extremely difficult to do anything with that. And no investment will help us, because at the end of the day, the investments should turn into something that people would willing to buy, either services or goods. That are investments. Investments are not empty airports like in Spain, empty roads like in Spain or other countries, or empty high-speed trains. So this is a real issue. It's way too much debt, and probably without some kind of haircut, it is impossible any kind of realistic and good growth. Would you agree with that, or you don't think so that the debt is an issue? Because we didn't speak too much about that.
No, I think if I may answer that. First of all, I have to make very clear that I am not totally against all regulation, or what I want to say very strongly that I'm fighting over-regulation. Number one. Number two, of course, we are interested, and I repeat myself, also in bad times of low growth to continue to finance privates as well as corporates. We are mostly interested, we didn't touch the subject so far, and I find that most important is the group of SMEs with its importance for Europe, for the European economy, and the possibility to continue to finance SMEs with their needs, also with regards to their midterm to long-term needs. I believe, frankly speaking, that we will continue to have to adopt to a time of low growth, and the banks have to a great extent already done that. Number four, to your statement, banks should have been let down to a greater extent in the past, during the last 7 years. I fully agree. I think we still have much too many banks in Europe, and if I take the figures of bank foreclosures in the US, they are at least 4 to 5 times, even 6 times higher than in Europe in the last 30 years, also in the last 10 years or so. So Europe is overbanked, and those banks without the banking with a proper strategy have been kept alive due to state intervention, and those banks should have closed. What happened now is a regulation. I'm with you. The regulation had to be. I'm not the one that said no regulation after the year 2008, but it was, haircut overall without I'm sorry.
This is a very action-packed panel.
No distinction, and that is so much hurting, and I'm also fully with you that there were many banks, many European banks, without a proper business profile that came to the state like that and said, please help us. Yes. That's
Martin,
it.
can you take this issue, especially of the question raised about demand and about sustainable demand versus empty airports, and how you figure that out?
I want to make one comment on it, because it also links back to an earlier point that was made on saving behavior. I think it's simple arithmetics that if there are countries that are or companies or households that are too highly indebted, and so they need to deleverage. So then, unless someone else is willing to buy more, this cannot take place. No, this is so. If someone has to save more, someone else has to save less in the closed system. Now, typically, if you're a small country, then you solve this problem by simply exporting more to the rest of the world. If you take Europe as a whole, or the Eurozone for that matter, we're so big that one can ask yourself the question whether that is a realistic strategy. So, so that's where the notion comes from, that, okay, clearly part of the solution needs to come from those countries, persons, households, companies that are over-indebted, that they need to save more to reduce their debt. But that is not likely to succeed if there are no others that are willing to expand. This is simple. This is quite simple arithmetics. Now, I'm not saying anything about how this process should work, because this can be additional private spending, private investment, or public. For the arithmetics, this doesn't matter. But what does matter is the thing needs to balance. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a race, in a spiral, as the minister said. We stick into this vicious circle. So this is, and going back to and as Germany was mentioned. So last year the Commission came out indeed with an advice, a country specific recommendation for Germany that pointed out that that it would make sense also from a German perspective to expand investment. There is a stock of capital which is eroding, quite frankly, which is not to the benefit, which is absolutely not to the benefit of Germany itself. And now, if you are in an environment where you have very low interest rates, well, certainly for some countries, in particular for Germany, and you see at the same time that your capital stock is actually is eroding, well, then one could say, well, now would be quite a good time to invest, and then you can have a discussion on who should invest and how to organize, and that's almost a separate chapter. But for me, it's very clear that this is the time to invest, also or in particular for countries that have certain saving surpluses.
So, sorry, let me interrupt
Absolutely,
again.
yeah, and then
So
maybe Minister would like
only
to
one
respond.
additional point. I think it's one of the key questions. So after the investment, the evaluation of the result of the investment. So that's why the post-evaluation, so it's absolutely important point of the activity. So the EIB, so the post-evaluation of the project and several initiatives in the previous times, for instance, in the field of infrastructure, because you mentioned several infrastructure projects, is a key question. It's not only for the board, but for the European Commission, for the European Council, and for the European Parliament, and additionally, non-governmental institutions too. Today in Luxembourg, so the weather is a bit worse than in Bratislava, because it's always raining there. So water not only in the Danube, but so from the coast too. So a big event. If I remember correctly, 18 NGOs there, and asked the vice president, the senior vice president of the bank, in the previous activity about the investment and the result of the investment, so, and the transparency of the investment and some other important questions. So I think it's important, so, and that's why I remarked it. So.
Great. Mr. Any thoughts?
I think this is case by case, because it can be also the question of potential growth, I think. For example, in my country, the potential growth is about figure 3% of GDP. If you look at Germany, it's about 1%. In France, it's even more than in Germany. And look at our figures. So for this year, we have grows 2.5, 2.6% of GDP. This is, I think, our forecast for this year. And what is the problem of this country is not about the healthy banking sector, because the capital adequacy is almost double, I think, than is needed, 15 or 14, 15%.
Yes.
So also, the transfer of dividends is a different problem. Okay, let's fly away this money. The problem in my country is not also the private debt, because it's much lower than in other countries, below 100% of GDP. Public debt, okay, this is a very sensitive subject of discussion in my country, but still the level of Maastricht debt, it's about 55%, so below 55%. So if you compare with other countries, it's really peanuts. This is not the problem. The problem is employment, and this is the real, and the biggest problem is the structure unemployment. And look at the, but this is the real hesitation from the history, because we reshape our economy. You remember, or you know, but maybe you know that we are the part of Czechoslovakia, focusing on heavy industry, heavy chemistry, production of weapons in the past. And we reshaped this industry to the production of the cars. Everything which is connected with cars is produced in Slovakia. This is a question of sensitivity. That's true. That is not only lack, we have a lack of economy, what we have. And look at the figures with the growth of 2.5 or below 3%, we generated the new jobs this year. It was more than 1.5%. So this is a very good sign for us. What's the problem? It's a slowdown in Germany, in surrounding countries, but still, despite of the slowdown in surrounding countries, the domestic consumption is picking up after several years. This is important. So the structure of the growth is extremely important, because in the past, in these gloomy years, we were fully dependent on external demand. And now we are able, for certain time, it's not forever, for certain time we can be pleased with this domestic demand as a very healthy part of growth, which is generating also the jobs. And this is the problem of my country.
Thanks for that. We had a comment coming back here, I think. Might be, no? Okay. Is there anyone else who's been handed a microphone already that I didn't notice? No, in that case, we have a question back here.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Mario Nicolini. I'm from the Central European Strategy Council, and you may pardon me for infusing a bit of another dimension to this investment forum. I very much like how the discussion is going, pro-growth, pro-investment, but I'm a little bit concerned with two comments that I picked up here. One on the potential problems with defense expenditure being noted as a challenge, and the other one, a realization that perhaps the rules on bank lending might be too tight in order to generate or fund transitions in our neighboring countries and potentially then EU enlargement. Now, the weather around us is no longer good anymore, and we see that in Ukraine. It's actually a thunderstorm. So we find ourselves in a whole new geostrategic context here, and both news, I think, would be of concern here on if the EU enlargement project were to halt. I think we are now seeing Russia's attempts at imposing an alternative model to European integration in our neighborhood. And there, clearly, the EU has to be concerned, because in economic terms at least, EU enlargement, as it was the case with our Central European countries, EU enlargement has actually made Europe stronger, and more vibrant in the global competition. As regards defense expenditure and potential problems with that from at least a financial perspective, I think the extent of the challenge that Russia is posing and the authoritarian regimes are posing right now to us may lead us in the future to a point when there will be nothing to defend at all, or at least the European model and Europe as we know it. So much for my comments, and hopefully this adds a
Thanks very much for the question. Biden, would you like to?
Now, no, let's on the issue of neighboring countries and new accession. As President Juncker has said, he is not expecting new accessions in the next 5 years. Now, that does not mean that the EU is going to abandon those countries, and in fact, I would say far from it. We want to, at the same time, we want to strengthen the economic and political cooperation also with these countries, and so it's not. So I just want to make that very clear now. Clearly, and now I'm going way out of my normal domain, but clearly what's happening in the Ukraine is posing a challenge to all of us, and is certainly of great concern. I can say from the financial economic side, that is the side that I happen to work in. We're making great efforts to at least support as much as possible the Ukraine in these difficult times, and yes, that's I suppose that's where we are.
So some additional points to Ukraine, because the bank is my responsibility, my regional responsibility. As you know, the European Union has a common program with Ukraine. It's the previous president of the Commission, Mr. Barroso, declared, if I remember correctly, this year in March in Brussels. So it's around 11 billion investment in Ukraine in the next 3 years. And so one contributor is the European Commission, the other is the European Bank for Research and Development, and the last one, but not least one, so the European Investment Bank. We have a very ambitious program, so about 3 billion euros investing, project investment in Ukraine is, I think it's very important to underline this project investment. But at the moment, the political situation is not very stable. So at the moment, it's not creating a new government. But after the election, the situation is clearer than in the previous time. But the investment, the project investment in Ukraine is it's not very easy to find a correct project. So in the 90% of the areas, Ukraine is at the moment is very stable. It's a peaceful territory, but the other 10% is so-called it's a war territory. But in this part of Ukraine, it's a majority of Ukraine. So it's possible investment. But how can we find the project, and how can we finance this? Directly using the Ukrainian government contribution, but at the moment the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian rating, it's the lowest level, and that's why it needs any additional guarantees. And the additional points, the municipalities, which needs several investment, and the rehabilitation of all the country, all the infrastructure of the country. So not only in the eastern part of Ukraine, but the western part of Ukraine too. So we financed several projects, and this year We signed, for instance, a new Basket Rail tunnel, which is important to the connection in the western part of Ukraine to...
Right, but things are on hold right now, right? Because of the EU approach towards Ukraine. I mean, the EIB is not doing anything, as I understand it.
Yeah. So I don't want to give you any other project because several some pipeline. But,
I mean, is active work going on these right
yeah,
now
we are
amid the sanctions?
we are working the Ukrainians. So the sanctions, so it's another question because it's reached, for instance, the banking sector because Ukraine has several partially Russian-owned banks, and that's why there's activity with these banks. So at the moment it's prohibited not only on the EU side, but from the United States, which is important because the EIB is very active in the borrowing side, the United States money market, and that's why we have to follow all the sanctions, and we very correctly followed all the sanctions of the European Union and the United States too. So it's, of course, it's an issue for the future, but at the moment it's the cooperation with the Russians under the sanctions is impossible.
Right. Martin, would you like
Well, just one
Yeah.
last thought on this. Clearly, and this is now clear to everybody, the situation in the Ukraine brings home very clearly the point or the importance of to work on energy security, and this is now high on the agenda, obviously. And well, here we have.
On the other side, you have. Yeah, it's interesting for the investment project.
That was exactly what I was going to say, just to bring it back to the topic of today, that this clearly needs to be part of the package.
Minister, I'd like to come back to something you said just a moment ago. You talked about how domestic demand has really helped Slovakia's economy, and also how it is temporary and you don't think people can count on it. So I guess I'd like to ask you what has been the source of this demand and why you think it will end soon.
So the resource of this demand is definitely its better situation in 2013 or in the end of 2013, because you know that 2013 average in the Eurozone was a recession, and our figures was below 1% of GDP, the growth in 2013. But in 2014, it was based on increasing of wages, but not against the productivity, because really Slovak Republic has very high productivity of labor. If you look at the unit labor cost over the last couple of years, so really now we have a room to increase the wages. We increased also minimum wage. We're going to increase the minimum wage historically for next year, but at the same time we would like to decrease the labor cost for low-income workers, because we would like to lower the tax burden for employers and employees, for workers all at the same time. So we are going to increase the net income of this kind of workers, employees. This is the part of this structural unemployment. This is the way how we would like to attract the labor market for these people, and also to motivate, attract the employers, because in this way we are able to deliver the decreasing of labor costs for companies. This is about 0.3% of GDP. This is the cause of this. This is the structural reform which we are going to realize for next year. So this is the way how to maybe to survive these bad times again, because I'm listening the IMF meeting in just now in October in Washington. Actually, again, to change this climate. If you compare with spring meeting, it's different. Also, we have to be very cautious about this, what is coming now.
But what's the temporary part? Why would this cycle of domestic demand, why would it stop?
I'm not prophet in this moment, but we would like to rely on this domestic demand for coming year, because it's really in the past we used to have slowed down by because this interconnection with German economy is so high that the slowdown was just 3 or 4 months. Now it's much longer. But this is coming from this structure of the quality of the growth, which now we have at this moment.
Rebecca, can I
Mhm.
still come back?
Absolutely, and then maybe keep it brief. We'll see if there's one more question. We have about 10 minutes left, so perhaps we'll have your comment, we'll go to the audience if there is one, and then we'll hear from all the panelists once more. But please, join the discussion.
I don't want to leave this discussion without tackling again the issue of SMEs and the importance for both investment and employment. And this is what you, Mr. Minister, have been focusing very much so. I say that because with the regulation of Basel III, in spite of the introduction of the factor, I have to say it whether you like it or not.
I love it. I'm a junkie. I was in Basel last month.
Yes, but that's very important. It is very disadvantageous for SMEs to borrow at the moment. And therefore, I think it is all our task, and I'm happy to sit here beside the Commissioner, that the Small Business Act is under revision now, and we can all, up to the 15th of December, come up with new proposals in order how we can ease the position of SMEs. And this is the point which I wanted to stress, because, and this is my final word with regards to the present situation of over-liquidity and also the SME asset-backed security that has been introduced by the EZB. I think that the key issue is that banks at the moment, besides concentrating on increasing their capital position, in spite of the fact that we have more than in abundance, not only in Slovakia, but also in other countries, they are investing their over-liquidity again in government bonds. Now, government bonds investments are investments because they are capital-free, because banks have not to underlie that investment, contrary to an investment when you borrow to a small and medium-sized company, you have to underlie it with zero. I find this solution, frankly speaking, necessary from the point of view because we still have not another modus operandi as there is in the States for public financing. But it does not solve the problem with the structural problems that we have with SME financing. So my ceterum censure is the SME financing regulation that we have in Basel III has to be adopted as fast as possible if we want to increase investments.
And how destabilizing would it be to raise the risk weighting on sovereign bonds to perhaps make it more...
To make it less attractive for
Exactly.
banks on the one side, and on the other side, please, we have 98% of all Euro firms that are SMEs.
Yes.
They employ 75% of all employees, and they have 60% of their value added. That means a solution. I mean, we are talking about large investment in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But the real impact that we have to solve and find a solution is on the masses of European companies to make them lending and borrowing again.
So-
This is the solution.
Minister, do you think
Refinancing
your
that,
fellow euro
sorry.
area
That's right.
ministers would like to see people moving away from buying euro area bonds and into buying corporate bonds
really
and other
not.
things?
I'm not afraid as a finance minister of Slovakia, because we used to face to this tendency, I think, because also your banks, because in the past, this ratio was more than 60% in this country, which the bonds used to be bought by domestic banks. When we now more diversify, also we focus more on US dollar, Swiss franc, Czech crown, even Norwegian crown. So after 2011, we changed the strategy. We don't rely anymore on upstream banks on this issue. But generally speaking, I think I cannot imagine. I'm about my colleagues in the Eurozone and the European Union that they are ready to be threatened with this option, because I remember that all actions are really, there are always exceptions for the financing of sovereign debt, because the crisis, sovereign crisis is present, or at least we remember it, from certain countries. And look at the program countries, it's always important. The Greek case is also, it's not over in this moment. It's important for us how to exit from this program. It's very up to date. I think it's very fresh issue, I think, for us. But to irritate us, Mr. Stapic, it's good enough, I think.
I remember very well, because here is a Greek expert beside me. I remember very well. I remember very well the situation when the Greek crisis started, when the French finance minister approached French banks, stating, "Gentlemen, you must not sell Greek bonds." And then we are talking about the banking crisis.
Yeah.
Then we are talking about the banking crisis. We still have state bonds without capital underlying, simply because we have not found an alternative for it in Europe. And that I fully subscribe. But I think it's high time to also find an alternative solution, at least step by step, to change that situation.
We have 3 minutes left, so perhaps we'll just come back down.
I come back to
Thank you so
the
much,
realities
everyone.
again
Yeah.
and the figures only, because you mentioned the SMEs. So by the end 2013, the total lending value breached 17 billion euros, with 34 billion being mobilized through the complementary lending scheme. This was the total activity of the EIB. And in Slovakia, so I think it's important, the EIB concluded 11 intermediated loan contracts amounting 453 million with Slovak banks and leasing companies. That is our contribution to the SME sector. So.
All right. Would you like to respond to any of these comments?
Well, just very briefly on the importance of SME finance. Yes, I think this is one of the categories that we see of companies that are still struggling. So this is clearly an area where still policy attention is warranted in whatever form.
Minister, would you like to have the last word in this very interesting panel?
No, I'm not the man of last words. I think it's extremely important for us, the result of work of task force, because we're waiting for us, and it must be a realistic output, I think. It's not just up to us, it's up to countries and the members of this task force. It's important for Jean-Claude Juncker, it's important for the ministers of finance, for EIB, because the EIB will be the part of this game. And there is it's extremely important for the growth for next year, because just to blah 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 about the growth and structuring reforms and fiscal discipline, because with fiscal discipline we have delivered, I think, at this moment, majority, and we are on the good track on structural reforms in the countries. At least we can force them on this issue. And investment, this is nothing new. This is the part of healthy growth and life. So it's up to us to deliver something.
We'll be watching.
Okay.
Thank you all very much for attending the panel. Thank you so much to the wonderful panelists for the great conversation. And I think we have a coffee break now. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.